First contact with human instructors. Professor Kelther adjusted his breathing apparatus one final time before entering the lecture hall. The methane mixture required for his respiratory system was perfectly calibrated, thanks to the university's advanced life support systems. Today marked the beginning of something unprecedented in the Galactic Confederation's educational history. "Welcome, students," he announced as beings from across the galaxy settled into their various seating arrangements, hover chairs for the gaseous entities, suspension tanks for aquatic species, and crystalline pedestals for the silicon-based lifeforms. "I am Professor Kelther, and this semester we will be studying the most fascinating species to join our confederation in over a millennium, Earth humans." A ripple of interest moved through the assembled students. Many had never encountered a human in person, and for good reason. Earth was classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, a designation reserved for planets so hostile that most species avoided them entirely. Vexera, a translucent jellyfish-like being floating in her environmental suit, pulsed with curiosity. "Professor, is it true that humans evolved on a world actively trying to eliminate them?" "Indeed," Kelther replied, his 4 tentacles dancing across the holographic controls. The display screen illuminated with an image of Earth, swirling blue oceans, white cloud formations, and patches of green and brown landmasses. This seemingly peaceful world harbors countless dangers: predatory creatures, catastrophic weather systems, deadly microorganisms, and geological instabilities that would terrify most Confederation species. Before anyone could respond, the lecture hall's rear entrance hissed open. "Today," Professor Kelther announced, "we have 2 extraordinary guest instructors who will guide us through this semester's exploration. Please welcome Commander Sarah Chen and Sergeant Marcus Torres of the Earth Defense Corps." The 2 humans entered with measured steps, their blue and silver uniforms crisp and professional. Sarah stood slightly taller, her black hair pulled back in a regulation style, while Marcus's broader frame and shorter brown hair gave him a more compact appearance. Both moved with a fluid precision that several predatory species in the class immediately recognized. "Greetings, everyone," Sarah said, her smile revealing the flat, white teeth that made her herbivorous students shift uncomfortably. "We're honored to share our culture and history with such a distinguished group." Marcus nodded respectfully. "We've worked extensively with Professor Kelther to develop a curriculum that will help you understand not just what humans are, but why we became what we are." Quillen, a crystalline entity whose internal light patterns indicated deep thought, raised a limb. "Commander Chen, our records indicate that humans maintain military forces despite joining our peaceful confederation. This seems contradictory to our values." The 2 humans exchanged a brief glance, a microcommunication that Professor Kelther found fascinating. "That's an excellent question," Sarah replied diplomatically. "Human history has been shaped by constant challenges that required us to remain perpetually prepared for danger. This preparation became so fundamental to our survival that it's now woven into our cultural DNA." Trilax, a 6-legged reptilian whose scales had shifted to a pale blue of confusion, spoke up. "But the Confederation has maintained peace for over 2,000 years. My people, the Scalarians, haven't engaged in violence for 50,000 years. We evolved beyond such primitive instincts." Marcus stepped forward slightly, his expression remaining neutral but somehow more intense. "Different evolutionary pressures create different solutions. Where your world provided safety and abundance, ours provided constant threats that demanded adaptation." Professor Kelther observed the growing tension with academic fascination. "This is precisely why this course exists," he interjected smoothly. "The Confederation values diversity of thought and experience. Our human colleagues offer perspectives that complement rather than threaten our peaceful society." As the session concluded and students began filing out in their various modes of locomotion, Professor Kelther approached the 2 humans. "An intriguing first impression," he observed. "Though I sense some students harbor concerns about your military background." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "It's understandable. Most Confederation species developed in environments that eventually eliminated external threats. They can't comprehend a world that never stopped trying to kill its inhabitants. Marcus's expression darkened slightly. Wait until they see what we're bringing next week. Then they'll truly understand what survival on Earth required. Professor Kelther's skin shifted to a deeper blue, his species equivalent of anticipation mixed with concern. Yes, I expect their reactions will be educational for all of us. Primitive tools and ancient wisdom. 3 weeks had passed since the initial introduction, and the alien students had grown somewhat accustomed to their human instructors. However, the mixture of curiosity and wariness remained palpable as they gathered for today's demonstration. The classroom had been relocated to a specialized facility within the university, a larger space with reinforced transparent barriers and advanced safety protocols. Several students noticed the change immediately. Why do we require such security measures for an educational presentation? Vexura asked, her bioluminescent patterns flickering with concern. Quilan's crystalline structure pulsed thoughtfully. Perhaps our instructors intend to demonstrate something more substantial than historical artifacts. Professor Kelther entered alongside Sarah and Marcus, who now wore simple gray utility uniforms instead of their formal dress. Behind them, an automated platform carried a sealed container of considerable size. Welcome to today's session, Professor Kelther announced. As promised, our human colleagues will demonstrate the evolution of their defensive technologies. I must emphasize that everything presented today has been thoroughly reviewed and approved by Confederation security. Marcus approached the container and began methodically placing objects on a long table. We'll begin with humanity's earliest innovations and progress chronologically through our development. He lifted a simple stone tool, roughly shaped flint attached to a wooden handle. This is a hand axe, designed approximately 2 million years ago. It represents humanity's first step toward tool manipulation. The students seemed underwhelmed. Most species had developed similar implements during their early stages. The significance, Sarah continued, activating a holographic projector, lies not in the tool itself, but in its application. The display showed a group of early humans confronting a massive, tusked creature covered in thick fur. This animal was called a mammoth, weighing several tons and possessing natural weapons that could easily kill any individual human. The students watched as the holographic humans surrounded the mammoth, their simple spears coordinated in a complex tactical formation. Humans were never the strongest, fastest, or most naturally armed species on Earth, Marcus explained. We survived through intelligence, cooperation, and adaptation. Trilex's scales shifted to orange skepticism. Pack hunting is common among many species. This hardly seems remarkable. True, Sarah acknowledged, but observed the next development. The hologram shifted to show humans constructing an elaborate pit trap, complete with camouflaged covering and carefully positioned spikes. We didn't just hunt, we engineered our environment to provide advantages. Quilan's internal light patterns accelerated. Fascinating. You manipulated terrain as a weapon system. Marcus moved to the next item, a curved wooden frame with a taut string connecting both ends. The bow and arrow represented a revolutionary advancement. It allowed humans to project force across distances, fundamentally changing our tactical capabilities. He demonstrated the weapon's mechanics, drawing the string back with a blunt-tipped arrow positioned against it. Several students instinctively retreated as the stored energy became visible in the bent wood. Jervik, the gaseous entity in the containment suit, requested closer examination. After careful inspection by university safety personnel, the bow was presented for study. Elegant engineering, Jervik observed through their translator. Potential energy converted to kinetic force through mechanical advantage. My species never required such innovations, we absorb nutrients directly from atmospheric components. Environmental pressures drive innovation, Professor Kelther noted. Each species develops solutions appropriate to their challenges. Sarah revealed the next item, a metal blade with a wrapped handle. This knife served dual purposes, tool and weapon. The development of metallurgy allowed humans to create more durable and effective implements. The demonstration continued through Bronze Age implements, iron weapons, and eventually reached medieval technology. Marcus hefted a recreation of a knight's sword, its polished steel gleaming under the classroom lights. For over 1,000 years, edged weapons like this dominated human warfare, he explained, moving through a series of practice forms. The blade cut through the air with audible whistles that made several students uncomfortable. Wait, interrupted Melinda, the hive mind consciousness that appeared as a shifting humanoid form. These weapons were used against other humans. Not just predatory animals. The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Most Confederation species had resolved internal conflicts millennia before achieving interstellar travel. Yes, Sarah replied quietly. Human history includes extensive periods of internal warfare. Competition for resources, territorial disputes, and ideological differences often escalated to violence. The alien students exchanged shocked communications through various methods: color changes, light patterns, electromagnetic pulses, and subsonic vibrations. Marcus set down the sword. This violence wasn't born from inherent evil, but from the same survival instincts that allowed us to thrive on Earth. When resources are scarce and threats are constant, competition becomes fierce. Professor Kelther sensed the growing discomfort and decided to intervene. This concludes today's demonstration of early human technology. Next week, we'll examine how these primitive innovations eventually evolved into more sophisticated systems. As students filed out in unusual silence, Vexera approached the instructors. Commander Chen, do humans still possess these violent tendencies? Should we be concerned about your species' integration into the Confederation? Sarah considered the question carefully. We've learned to channel those instincts toward protecting rather than conquering. But yes, the capacity remains. It's part of what makes us effective guardians of Confederation interests in dangerous regions of space. After the students departed, Professor Kelther approached the humans. That session generated significant unease among the students. Marcus nodded grimly. It'll get worse before it gets better. Wait until they see what we're bringing next week, the real game changers. Sarah's expression remained steady. Understanding breeds respect. Fear breeds hostility. We need them to comprehend our history before they can trust our intentions. Professor Kelther's tentacles waved in agreement, though his skin had shifted to the deep blue of concern. Indeed. Though I suspect their understanding will prove quite uncomfortable. The age of gunpowder and innovation. The attendance for the third session was notably smaller. Word had spread throughout the university about the previous week's disturbing revelations, and several students had requested transfers to less volatile courses. Those who remained displayed a mixture of morbid fascination and barely contained anxiety. The security measures had been upgraded again. Energy shields now supplemented the reinforced barriers, and 2 Confederation peacekeepers flanked the entrance, a precaution that did little to ease anyone's nerves. Professor Kelther noticed the tension immediately. I understand some of you have concerns about today's demonstration. I assure you that all safety protocols have been meticulously followed, and our human instructors are highly trained professionals. Sarah and Marcus entered wearing protective gear over their gray uniforms, a detail that caused Quelan's crystalline structure to dim with worry. Today we advance to what humans call the Gunpowder Age, Marcus announced, approaching a new, more heavily secured container. This period fundamentally changed how warfare was conducted on Earth. He withdrew a long, ornate tube with wooden stock and metallic components. This is a musket, developed approximately 600 years ago. It represents humanity's first practical chemical propellant weapon. The alien students leaned back collectively as Marcus demonstrated the weapon's loading procedure, though he used no actual gunpowder or projectile. The principle involves controlled chemical combustion, Sarah explained. Gunpowder burns rapidly in a confined space, generating gases that propel a metal projectile at high velocity. Jervik's containment suit trembled slightly. You harnessed explosive reactions as weapons? The safety risks alone were considerable, Marcus agreed. Early firearms were dangerous to users and targets alike. But they offered significant advantages over previous technologies. He activated a holographic display showing human soldiers in formation, their muskets raised in coordinated volleys. A peasant with 6 months' training could defeat a knight who had trained his entire life. Gunpowder democratized warfare. Trilach's scales had shifted to deep purple, a color indicating extreme distress in his species. This technology eliminated the advantage of experience and skill. In many ways, yes, Sarah confirmed. But it also created new forms of tactical complexity. The hologram showed elaborate battle formations, with humans using terrain, timing, and coordination in increasingly sophisticated ways. Marcus revealed the next weapon, a more advanced firearm with intricate metalwork. This is a flintlock rifle from our 18th century. Notice the improved accuracy and reliability. As he demonstrated the firing mechanism's operation, the distinctive clicking sounds made several students flinch involuntarily. The evolution didn't stop there, Sarah continued, unveiling a series of increasingly advanced weapons. Repeating rifles, revolvers, machine guns, each innovation designed to increase effectiveness while reducing the time and skill required for operation. The displays that followed showed human conflicts of staggering scale and intensity. Millions of soldiers armed with progressively more lethal weapons, engaging in battles that dwarfed anything in most species' historical records. Melinda's hive-mind consciousness flickered erratically. How did your species survive such destructive capabilities? These weapons could eliminate entire populations. They did, Marcus replied solemnly. Human history includes numerous genocides, mass casualties from warfare, and near extinctions of various groups. We learned the hard way that power without wisdom leads to catastrophe. Vexra's bioluminescent patterns had shifted to the rapid, chaotic flashing associated with panic. And you still possess these weapons? Even now. More advanced versions, yes, Sarah admitted. But we've also developed the social and ethical frameworks to control their use. The same survival instincts that created these weapons eventually taught us the necessity of restraint. Professor Kelther observed his students' reactions with growing concern. Several appeared to be having physiological stress responses. Perhaps we should pause for questions. Quillen's voice emerged as a high-pitched harmonic. Why? Why would any species develop such destructive capabilities? My people's greatest weapons were focused sound waves used for mining operations. Marcus set down the rifle and faced the class directly. Because on Earth, the alternative to superior weaponry was often extinction. Human tribes, nations, and civilizations that couldn't defend themselves were conquered, enslaved, or eliminated by those who could. The pressure was constant, Sarah added. While your species developed in environments that eventually became safe, humans faced threats from other humans, predatory animals, natural disasters, and diseases that required constant vigilance and innovation. The remainder of the session proceeded in uncomfortable silence as the humans demonstrated increasingly sophisticated weapons, early cannons, explosive devices, and chemical weapons that had been used in massive conflicts. As the class concluded, most students departed quickly, avoiding eye contact with the human instructors. Only a few lingered, their expressions troubled. Trilach approached cautiously. Sergeant Torres, these weapons you've shown us, they represent thousands of years of human development focused primarily on killing. How can the Confederation trust a species with such a violent heritage? Marcus considered the question carefully. Because that same heritage taught us the true cost of violence. We learned through bitter experience that survival requires not just the ability to fight, but the wisdom to know when not to. After the students left, Professor Kelther approached the humans. His skin had shifted to the darkest blue his species could produce. I'm receiving reports that several students are requesting psychological counseling. The university administration is questioning whether this course should continue. Sarah nodded grimly. We understand their concern. But they need to comprehend our complete history before they can trust our current intentions. Next week will be the most difficult session, Marcus warned. When they see what 20th and 21st century humans created, they'll truly understand why we develop such strict controls over our own capabilities. Professor Kelther's tentacles curled anxiously. I fear what their reactions might be. Some species have never encountered the concept of weapons designed solely for mass destruction. Then they need to understand, Sarah replied firmly, because in a galaxy full of unknown threats, that knowledge might one day save all of us. Part 4, Modern Warfare and the Price of Power. Only 12 students remained for the fourth session, less than half the original enrollment. The classroom felt cavernous with so few beings present, and the security measures had been upgraded to what could only be described as intimidating. Multiple layers of energy shields, blast-resistant barriers, and a full squad of Confederation peacekeepers created an atmosphere more reminiscent of a military facility than an educational institution. Professor Kelther's tentacles moved nervously as he addressed the sparse audience. Today's demonstration will cover the most recent centuries of human military development. I must warn you that the content may be particularly disturbing to species who have not experienced large-scale warfare. Sarah and Marcus entered wearing full protective suits, their faces visible through transparent visors. The container they brought was larger than any previous one, and it hummed with the power of multiple containment fields. The 20th century marked the beginning of humanity's industrial age of warfare, Sarah began, her voice carrying through the suit's communication system. The scale of conflict grew exponentially with our technological capabilities. Marcus activated a holographic display showing vast battlefields filled with humans in uniform formations. What you're seeing is World War I, a conflict that involved dozens of nations and resulted in over 17 million casualties. The alien students recoiled as the display showed massive artillery bombardments, chemical weapon attacks, and mechanized warfare on a scale that beggared their imagination. Vexra's bioluminescent patterns had shifted to rapid, erratic pulses indicating severe distress. 17 million deaths. In a single conflict? That was just the beginning, Marcus replied grimly. He shifted the display to show even larger battles, aerial bombardments, and naval warfare. World War II claimed over 70 million lives and introduced weapons that could destroy entire cities in seconds. The humans unveiled their first modern weapon, a scaled model of what appeared to be a massive projectile. This represents a nuclear weapon, Sarah explained. It harnesses the fundamental forces that power stars, creating explosions equivalent to thousands of tons of conventional explosives. The silence in the classroom was absolute. Even the university's environmental system seemed to quiet as the implications sank in. Queelan's crystalline structure had gone completely dark, a state of shock his species rarely experienced. You created weapons that could destroy cities. How many such weapons exist? At the peak of the Cold War, humans possessed over 70,000 nuclear weapons, Marcus replied. Enough to render Earth uninhabitable multiple times over. Jervik's containment suit began to oscillate, a sign of extreme agitation. Why? Why would any species create such destructive capability? Because other humans were doing the same thing, Sarah answered. The logic was that possessing overwhelming destructive power would prevent its use, a concept we called mutually assured destruction. The demonstration continued with increasingly sophisticated weapons, guided missiles, electronic warfare systems, biological weapons, and finally, the technologies that had enabled human expansion into space. Our military technology eventually exceeded our ability to survive on Earth, Marcus explained, showing orbital weapons platforms and antimatter containment systems. We had to expand beyond our homeworld or risk extinction from our own capabilities. Trilax, who had remained silent throughout most of the session, finally spoke, his scales now a deep, almost black purple. How did your species avoid destroying itself completely? Sarah removed her helmet, revealing an expression of profound sadness. We nearly did. Multiple times. The only thing that saved us was the gradual realization that our survival required not just superior weapons, but superior wisdom in their use. The holographic display shifted to show massive structures on Earth, towering cities, pristine wilderness areas, and humans working together in peaceful endeavors. The same drive that created our weapons also pushed us to develop technologies for healing, building, and exploring. We learned to channel our competitive instincts toward constructive rather than destructive goals. Marcus unsealed the final item in the container, a small, seemingly innocent device. This is a non-functional model of a personal defense weapon used by modern humans. It's more powerful than the cannons we showed you last week, yet small enough to be carried by a single person. The student stared at the device in horrified fascination. The idea that such destructive potential could be contained in something so portable was beyond their comprehension. Every human ship, every colony, every military unit has access to weapons that could devastate entire regions, Sarah continued. But we also have the cultural and legal frameworks to prevent their misuse. Our violent history taught us the absolute necessity of self-control. As the session concluded, the remaining students sat in stunned silence. Professor Kelther's skin had shifted to colors his species used only for mourning the dead. Melinda's hive-mind consciousness spoke for the first time that day, her voice barely audible through the translator. Commander Chen, given this history, how can any species trust humans with such power? How can you trust yourselves? Sarah met the aliens' collective gaze directly. Because every lesson we learned about destruction, we paid for with the lives of our own people. We understand the true cost of violence better than any species that developed in safety. That knowledge is our greatest weapon against our own destructive potential. After the students departed, Professor Kelther approached the humans with visible trepidation. The university administration is demanding that next week's session be the final one. They're concerned about the psychological impact on students. Marcus nodded grimly. One more session should be enough. They need to see how we've moved beyond pure destruction, how we've learned to protect rather than just attack. Will that be sufficient? Professor Kelther asked. To overcome the fear we've generated? Sarah looked at the empty classroom, then back at the professor. It has to be. Because if they can't understand why we became what we are, they'll never trust us to be what we've chosen to become. From warriors to guardians. The final session drew an unexpected crowd. Word of the course's controversial content had spread throughout the university, and beings who had never enrolled were seeking permission to attend. The lecture hall had been changed once more, this time to the university's largest auditorium, with hundreds of alien students, faculty, and even some off-world dignitaries filling every available space. Professor Kelther stood before the assembled crowd, his skin displaying the complex pattern of colors that indicated both nervousness and determination. Today marks the conclusion of our study into human defensive technologies. Our instructors will demonstrate how humanity has evolved from a species defined by warfare to one dedicated to protection and preservation. Sarah and Marcus entered to absolute silence. Unlike previous sessions, they wore no protective gear and carried no sealed containers. Instead, they brought only a simple table with a few small objects and a holographic projector. Over the past month, we've shown you humanity's history of violence, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast auditorium. Today, we want to show you what we learned from that history. Marcus activated the projector, displaying images of Earth not as they'd seen before, scarred by war and devastation, but as it existed in the present, vast green forests, clean oceans, cities that seemed to grow from the landscape rather than dominate it. After our last great global conflict, humans faced a choice, he explained. We could continue the cycle of destruction that had defined our species, or we could use our hard-won knowledge to build something better. The display shifted to show human space vessels, not warships, but exploration craft, medical ships, and massive transport vessels carrying supplies to distant worlds. The same technologies that created our weapons became the foundation for our expansion into space, Sarah continued. Chemical propulsion, nuclear power, materials science, electronics, all originally developed for warfare, now used to explore the galaxy and assist other species. A murmur rippled through the audience as the display showed human rescue operations, pulling survivors from a collapsed Alterian mining station, delivering medical supplies to plague-stricken vegan colonies, and defending a peaceful research station from space pirates. Quaylen, who had attended every session despite his obvious distress, spoke up. But you still maintain military forces. You still possess those terrible weapons. Yes, Marcus replied without hesitation. Because the galaxy isn't entirely peaceful, and some threats require force to address. But look at how we use that force now. The hologram showed human military units engaged not in conquest, but in protection, escorting refugee ships, maintaining quarantine around dangerous phenomena, and standing guard over archaeological sites containing dangerous ancient technologies. We learned something crucial from our violent past, Sarah explained. The greatest strength isn't the ability to destroy, but the wisdom to know when not to. Every human soldier, every ship captain, every colonist learns our history, not to glorify it, but to ensure we never repeat it. Vexra's bioluminescent patterns had shifted to a curious mixture of hope and uncertainty. You're saying that your capacity for violence now serves to prevent violence? Exactly, Marcus confirmed. The same instincts that made humans excellent warriors make us excellent guardians. We understand threats because we've been threats. We know how to fight because we've had to fight. And we know when to stop fighting because we've seen what happens when you don't. The demonstration that followed was unlike any of the previous sessions. Instead of weapons of destruction, the humans showed defensive technologies, energy shields that could protect entire cities, medical systems that could heal injuries that would be fatal to most species, and communication networks that could coordinate rescue operations across star systems. Every piece of human military technology has a corresponding civilian application, Sarah explained. Our missile guidance systems became our navigation computers. Our battlefield medicine became our standard healthcare. Our encryption methods became our data security. Professor Kelther stepped forward. Students, you've heard concerns about trusting a species with such a violent history. But I want you to consider what we've learned. Humans didn't develop their aggressive capabilities from cruelty or malice, but from necessity. And having learned the true cost of violence, they've chosen to use their strength for protection rather than conquest. An elderly Centaurian delegate, her crystalline exoskeleton reflecting the auditorium's lights, raised a trembling limb. Commander Chen, what assurance can you give that humans won't revert to their violent past if faced with sufficient provocation? Sarah considered the question carefully before responding. I can't give you that assurance. What I can tell you is that every human learns the price our species paid for its aggressive history. We carry the memory of 70 million dead in our last global war, of cities reduced to ash, of a planet nearly rendered uninhabitable by our own actions. That knowledge shapes every decision we make. Marcus added quietly, we know what we're capable of. That's precisely why we've chosen to be better. As the session drew to a close, the massive auditorium buzzed with conversation in dozens of languages and communication methods. The fear that had dominated previous sessions was still present, but it was now mixed with something else, understanding, and perhaps even a grudging respect. Trilak's approached the humans, his scales showing the deep green of contemplation. I spent weeks terrified of your species, he admitted. Now I find myself wondering if the Confederation's peaceful sectors wouldn't benefit from having guardians who truly understand the alternatives to peace. The final question came from Melinda, the hive mind whose collective consciousness had been deeply disturbed by the earlier demonstrations. If another species threatened the Confederation, would humans fight to defend it? Sarah and Marcus exchanged a look, not of consultation, but of shared certainty. Without hesitation, Sarah replied. We've learned that some things are worth fighting for. Peace is one of them. As the crowd dispersed, beings talking animatedly among themselves, Professor Kelther approached the two humans. I believe this course accomplished something remarkable, he observed. It transformed fear into understanding. Marcus shook his head slightly. Not transformed, educated. They should still fear what humans are capable of. But now they understand that we fear it too, and that shared fear is what keeps us all safe. Sarah smiled, the expression warmer than any she'd shown during the previous sessions. The best guardians are those who understand exactly what they're guarding against. Professor Kelther's tentacles waved in the gesture of deep approval. Indeed. Perhaps the Confederation is safer having warriors who have learned to be protectors rather than protectors who never learned to be warriors. As the humans packed their demonstration materials for the final time, students continued to approach with questions, no longer afraid but genuinely curious about the species that had chosen to transform its greatest weakness into its greatest strength. 3 months later, enrollment applications for human military academies began arriving from across the Confederation, not from species seeking to learn violence, but from those who wanted to learn how to transform strength into service, and fear into wisdom. The course had accomplished its goal. Humanity was no longer seen as a dangerous newcomer to be watched with suspicion, but as a guardian species whose violent past had taught them the true value of peace. The end.